Assalamu alaikum, brothers, sisters, friends. I'm here with Nossin.
Nossin, yeah.
Nossin, nice to meet Imran.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
And we're going to have just a casual discussion.
So name?
Imran.
Oh,
Imran.
Okay.
We're just going to have a nice casual discussion regarding two key things, two sort of fundamental areas of belief, and
Okay.
Islam in particular.
Okay.
And it will link to Judaism and Christianity, generally speaking.
Okay.
About belief in God
Okay.
and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Just to touch upon those, because I was hearing a bit of your discussion earlier.
Okay.
And there was a few points that you brought up. I don't think they were cleared,
Clarified,
or
okay.
clarified, or given enough due importance or understanding behind them. So I wanted to just clarify those and give you a bit more as far as substance is concerned with those 2 points.
Okay.
So you said something about belief.
Yeah.
You believe in God, obviously.
Yeah. I would say more than that. I would say I know that there's a God because it's the way I understand reality.
Yeah.
It's just my understanding.
Okay, that's very interesting. But you said you don't believe in absolute. So if you can just clarify that point for me, so I understand your position.
I don't necessarily believe in like absolute truth when it comes to humans. Like if you're human, like okay, here's the thing. Our knowledge, is limited. So what we anything that you know about something is always going to be limited, right? You cannot know anything absolutely.
Yes.
So when it comes to religions and this kind of things, it has that. It's always due through man, and that has a certain amount of limitation.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Nossin. You know, you made a statement that you can't know anything absolutely.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, if we look at that statement, there's a problem with it, because then how could you know that statement absolutely? Do you see the point? Right? So there has to be some absolutes.
Yeah. There's an exception to every rule.
Yeah. And I think you pointed out what that was, which was a belief in God. Right? Because
Well, here's the thing. There's a difference between. I would argue that there's a difference between. By the way, the sound's going to be fine with all this wind. Yeah. Very high. Okay.
they've accommodated for that, I think. Yeah, today.
I think there's a difference between being absolutely sure in the sense that you're 100% confident in something and that you've done all the research and done everything, and then there's another level of absolute certainty which says that that you're absolute certainty, like infinite uncertainty, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I think that because that we're limited, you can never know that you're absolute certain. So from that perspective, I can't even know that I exist.
Yeah.
Right? And I can't know that God exists from that perspective. But leaving that aside, leaving that absolute certainty, then there's just the certainty that we talk about in everyday life, right? Which you can be certain.
So,
But I'm certain. I'm absolute certain from that perspective, from an everyday perspective that I exist. I'm absolutely certain that it's God.
see, what you're touching upon is roots of knowledge, right? And
Yeah.
you're right to a great extent. I agree with you. But this is why in Islam, for example, when it comes to belief in God,
Yeah.
right, we begin with the Fitrah, which is now normally in the Western world you have roots of knowledge which are you have empiricism, which is through observation.
Yeah.
You have the use of the rational faculties to reason,
Yeah.
to use deduction and so on and so forth. And like you said, these tools, because it's based on a limited human being, they're not
Yes.
going to give you absolutes from that
Yes.
perspective.
Yes.
But in Islam, we believe that there is another type of knowledge,
Yeah.
which God has placed within every human being. So
Yeah.
it's called the Fitrah, and the
Okay.
Fitrah is what the Prophet Muhammad said. It's in the Qur'an as well. It's the first nature, the pure nature every human is born upon. So it's a knowledge which is implanted within, if you like, the spiritual DNA of the human being,
Okay.
and that is certainty, because it's not you don't arrive at that using your limited faculties as a human being.
Okay.
But what happens is, because the Prophet Muhammad in a narration, he said that every child is born upon the Fitrah,
Yeah.
but it's his parents that make him a Jew or a Christian or a Magian, and by extension, if you look at it from today's perspective, society shapes him basically. The Fitrah becomes covered, it becomes veiled. So what you can do through reasoning, through empiricism, through studying the world and using your human faculties, is to try and uncover that reality within the human being. Because that's what was interesting, and I may be understanding you wrong,
So what reality? Let's say again.
about
What
the
reality?
belief in God. So the knowledge of God,
uncover that.
uncover the
belief
knowledge of God which is
that-
placed
that
already
you-
within
that you
human
already
beings,
have.
right? Obviously, this is not much appreciated by Western discourse as it stands today. But what's interesting is, what you could be linked to is there is a concept of first principles, foundational beliefs in the Western tradition as well,
Yeah.
understanding.
Maxims,
right?
etc.
Exactly. But for example, science is based on an axiom that the real world exists, right? Without it, you can't do science. right? And you can't prove that via
It's a given assumption.
It's a given assumption.
We don't
exactly.
discuss it. It's just it's just
So,
automatic.
so if you want to make this point to a Western audience, what I would say is that you can see it as that, as the belief in God as being an axiom. We begin with that. It's the first principle. It's fitrah. It's innate, right? And that's why I think that's what you were alluding to when you said that you believe in God, and you're certain of it to an extent. I'm guessing.
Well, I'm certain of it. In the everyday life, in the everyday sense, I'm absolutely certain.
But when it comes to using your reasoning and stuff like that, you can't be certain with things. Is that what your point was?
No, I was just a philosophical point that what I'm saying that because we're limited, then when you're talking about absolute certainty, like absolute certainty, like infinite certainty, then you cannot know anything. Even this is just my own idea. You know, like I think it was Descartes says, I know, I think therefore I am.
I think therefore I am. Because
he
was about
so
destroy himself. If you think about it, if you look at his life, he was about to destroy himself.
Destroy himself.
Yeah, because he
couldn't get anything.
He let go of everything. Yeah,
he couldn't get anything.
He couldn't get anywhere.
But I would argue that even that is not certainty, because that is a piece of reasoning that you've used that may be faulty, or
because he was thinking that he thinks, right?
Yeah.
He could be flawed in that understanding.
I don't want to get bogged down in it. I guess it's really a side point. It's just that all I'm saying is that because we're limited, we cannot have infinite certainty of anything. But in the everyday world, right, we have what we call practical certainty, where like I'm practically certain that you exist. I'm practically certain. Definitely
it's axiomatic. You take it as an axiom.
Yeah, exactly. You can't prove axioms. It's a very simple way and a reasonable way to look at it. That's absolutely.
So I guess we're on the same page as far as that's concerned. But before we move on from, I guess, God's existence, which we believe is fitrah, it's innate, would you agree with that concept from your tradition?
No, not at all.
Okay. So how did you arrive at the conclusion that you were certain in God's existence? Because you said you don't believe in certainty using your rational faculties or these tools that we have. So it's just
I do believe in certainty using your rational faculties. My point is that it's a practical certainty, not an absolute, not an infinite certainty.
So the belief in God's a practical certainty.
Sure. We are practical human beings. We're physical, practical.
So what's the difference for you between practical certainty and actual certainty as in
infinite? I would define it as a difference between infinite certainty and like realistic certainty, right? So infinite certainty would be that you can somehow prove maxims. You can't prove maxims, right?
You don't need to prove maxims.
You don't.
That's the whole point of a maxim, is that it's unproven. It's impossible to prove an axiom or a maxim.
Right. But how can you be absolutely certain that the maxim is true?
Because of its necessity.
Because of its necessity.
Yeah. Meaning,
but
I'll give you an
is it
example.
possible that you think something's a maxim and it turns out not to be?
Well, it can be, yeah. It can
there you go. You can't be absolutely certain.
Yeah, no,
but it doesn't mean that I doubt it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that I doubt the maxims. It just means that because of... I don't want to get bogged down in this.
Yeah.
It's just... All I'm saying is that we cannot, because we are limited human beings, right? We cannot have infinite certainty. That has nothing to do with the day-to-day life, and it's nothing to do with science, nothing to do with philosophy. Yeah. It's just an absolute statement about the fact that we're human, right? So you can do philosophy, you can do science, you can do all sorts of things, right? And have certainty in everyday life. But I don't want to get it's a long bogged down.
Well, just to summarize that, I know because it's getting too deep into this, but the point about disproving axioms, that can only happen when the axiom itself was a flawed axiom to begin with, right?
So of course.
For example, there are certain...
But how do you know if it's flawed?
Sure. So here's the thing: there are certain, because they have certain criteria axioms. If you look at all the axioms
how do you know the criteria?
Sure. No, but what I mean by criteria is that when you look at the axioms we have, right? Yeah. For example, human rationality we take as an axiom. The past exists as an axiom. That the real world is real is an axiom. And there's many more, right? There's a whole array of them. There's not too many, but when you look at them across the board, there are certain things that are true for all of them, right? So
I wish we wouldn't get into this because I think it's a very boring discussion.
We'll come back out. Let's come back out of that discussion. But here's the thing: when it comes to Islam,
let's just say my belief is you cannot have, because we're limited. Yeah. Let's take it as a belief, and we'll accept that, and we can move on to discussion.
No, but this is why
that you cannot have infinite certainty, but you can have everyday certainty, which we use all the time. That's the only thing that's what we use all the time.
I would disagree with you on that point.
And that's what the maxims that we have. That would be what. No. It doesn't matter if you disagree. I'm just explaining what my belief is.
No, sure, I know.
Continue from
there. The reason I would, from my perspective, disagree with what you're saying, you can hold your belief, no problem. Is that from our tradition, we believe in the fitrah, which is not based on using your faculties to come to the conclusion God exists, all these tools that we've been given as human beings, which are limited. It's based on something placed within you. If that's the case, then we believe it is the case. Because if you can study human beings, look through history, the belief in God has always been there, naturally across the board. It's not something that people have arrived at, right? And we can argue an axiom, but here's the thing, the point is this, that if it's there, and it's fitrah, then I would say it's certain in the true sense. It's because it's not limited to our faculties that arrive at it, right? Now, I would say you can argue from, if you're speaking to someone that doesn't believe in God, you can argue from the perspective, well, look at life, look at reality, look at the things around us. They point out that they're a signpost to the transcendent anyway, right? Which you'll probably agree if you look at things,
Absolutely.
So when it comes to God, you believe, however you believe in it, whatever certain you
I believe
categorize it in.
absolutely.
Okay, we'll stick to that for now.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to your belief in God,
this God.
What do you believe about God? Like, do you believe He's one?
I was thinking about that recently. The thing is, I think when you use the word one, you're always talking about it in terms of the creation. You know, I've got one orange, two orange. I find it difficult to know what that would mean when you're talking about God, who's the creator. So I don't know what that would mean. Like, is it as opposed to, like, for example, if God's infinite, can it be called one? So another way of, some people describe, I think Eastern philosophies, they describe God as like zero. You know, as like. And there's different ways of coming towards that.
It's very interesting you said that, bro.
Well, just let me finish.
Yeah, sorry.
So, and I just want the point for the camera. So, basically, when you're using terms like one, you know, what about infinite? What about zero? So, for me, I don't know how much meaning that has, you know, to call it one. I mean, obviously, in a very simple term, do I believe there's many gods? No. From that perspective, no, absolutely, I believe there's one God. But you know, if you want to get really deep, then it gets. I think there's a bit more. There's more.
Have you read the Qur'an yourself?
No.
Okay, because what you're saying it just reminds me of something very powerful in the Qur'an. What you said is quite true, because God says, for example, in the 112th chapter, He says, "Qul huwa Allahu ahad," right? The word probably rings a bell with you if you know Aramaic. Or Hebrew. Yeah. So here's the thing: in the Arabic language, when you use the number system, the word that's used normally is wahid, which is one.
Okay.
But here, when God speaks about His oneness, He uses the word ahad. Now, if you look at the root of the word and you go into it, you study it, what you see is that this one is a one without a second or a third or a fourth. It's a one you can't break or individualize or make into parts. Okay. It's a one you can't link to the physical reality, the world we see around us in any way, shape or form. So it's beyond the scope, beyond the physical. So, and it's interesting because it's in line with what you're saying, because what you said is that when it comes to God, can you use the word one because it's about parts, it's a number, we use it in this way with reality. So it's interesting because God says Himself ahad, which signifies that this one is you use it in human language to say one, but when you really think about what this one means, it's distinct and disjoint from this reality in every way, shape or form. It's a unique one you can't break or put into parts in any way, shape or form. So I think it's very interesting with what you said. It's in line with what you believe is in line with what the Qur'an says in this respect with God's oneness.
So does that mean they invented the word specifically for God?
No, because the Arabic words already existed. But when it came
how was the word used other than God?
In the Arabic?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how it was.
Something you might want to think about.
Yeah, I'll have a look into that. That's quite a good point. But the thing interesting, there are some unique words in the Quran which didn't really exist in the Arabic beforehand, right? Okay. So, and this is why the Quran is used as the pinnacle of the Arabic language itself from a grammatical perspective, and they used it as a what's the word? What do you call something that's you use as a criterion for everything? Yeah, criterion, I guess. Yeah. Okay. But the point is that ahad itself, when you look at the word, when you study the word as it stands, it signifies it. And I don't think, as far as I know, that word in its proper sense has been used for other things. But I'll check that. I will look into
it. In Hebrew, it's used. Achad, shtaim, shalosh is used as a regular number.
What does it mean in the Hebrew?
One. Okay. It means just like in English, one.
Oh, so it's like the number one.
Yeah.
Okay. Right,
but in like they say God is like echad is one, but there's also other terms like yochid. It means like it's a singular. So there's other, and in Kabbalistic teachings it teaches like similar ideas what you're saying, but not in the same way. Yeah. But in the idea of different ways of understanding oneness and what you were talking about.
Yeah, and the following word in the second verse, God says Allahu Samad, which Do you have a similar word to that?
No.
As-samad?
As-samad.
As-samad. So as-samad is, now this I know where it was used previously in the Arabic as well, so I can give you that context to this. But as-samad basically means it's a one which is completely independent, free of need, any type of need, it's perfect. It depends on nothing, but everything within creation, everything that exists depends upon it. Right? And it's absolute. It also has a connotation of being absolute and eternal, right?
Okay.
So this is how God describes Himself, that He is this being, right? Normally, the word samad in the Arabic was used for something strong, like an anchor. So, for example, at the time of war, they will see the person who was the strong person, who people will rely upon and gather around to protect themselves. He will be a samad. For example, if you look in the I don't know. Well, if you look at the sea, when the ships in the sea, people will tie their ships to a very heavy rock or something very stable, and that would be a samad. So something that everything depends upon and relies upon. So that is a very unique word that God uses as His name, or describes Himself with, because what that signifies is that He is completely independent. He's not dependent on anything or anyone. He's unique. Everything depends upon Him. Would you agree with that concept of God?
My view of God, the way I understand God, I understand God. Actually, I think, as far as I understand, this is quite many cultures have understood this way of understanding God. Is that basically that God is everything, right? So basically, the universe is a part of God, right? There is nothing else besides God. In Hebrew, there's a term "ein od mavade," right, which means there's nothing else besides Him. That means that there is only one existence, and that is God.
That's interesting, because what we would say, would disagree with that slightly. We would say, for example, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There is no power or might except the power of God, right? But when it comes to creation, we would say God is distinct and disjoint from it. And the word as-samad also has this connotation, as well as ahad as well, that He's distinct and disjoint. He's not a part of this creation. And one logical way of looking at it is, if whoever made this bottle doesn't become the bottle, right?
Yeah, but
He's
that's
distinct
because,
and disjoint
of
from
course, because we're not the same as God, are we?
Yeah, no, but analogies don't apply to God, but it's just to make the point that if God always existed, which we believe He did, is eternal, and He created this finite effect, this creation, right?
Yeah.
And He existed before it, then He's not the creation itself, because we believe God is the being that can create from or via nothing. He's the only being that can do that. We can't. Creation can't. Like anyone that makes a bottle, they make it from raw material. They have the raw material, then they just reshape it into this.
Yeah.
But when it comes to God, He's the only being that has the ability to create from or via nothing, via His power and His majesty, right? So we don't say God is a part of creation. He created the creation, and He's distinct and disjoint from it. He's way above the creation.
Yeah.
So that's, I guess, a point we would disagree at.
Yeah.
Unless
I just want to add
sure.
to that. That my first understanding of God was actually through analogy, was through science actually.
Okay.
Well,
That's
as a kid, I was interested in science. So I had this physics book. Well, actually, I didn't really study physics in my school, but I had this physics book, and I got it like 8 years old. Anyway, so in physics, right? So all nature is the whole universe is basically just four forces, right? You know, the weak force, strong force, and and scientists are from string theory, they're assuming that there's really just one force, and they've already broken it down to just two forces. So that's why they make that assumption. The point is that if the whole universe, right, and which looks like you got a camera, you got people and everything, it looks like there's all these different things, and really it's just one force. If that's true physically, how much more so is that true spiritually and emotionally? So for me, so for me, my understanding of the universe as being part of God is very much in line with what we actually see of how the universe itself is comes about.
But there's a slight. See, I see what you're saying, but here's the thing: when your science studies the physical, right?
That's right.
Now, just because what's true for the physical, it doesn't mean it's true for the metaphysical, right?
It's true for the metaphysical too.
Not necessarily.
Principles.
Metaphysical principles exist within this reality, but they're not physical. That's the
Take
whole point.
mathematics, for example. Talk about maxims, right? You take one maxim, like for example, and based on that, you can have many. You can build a whole thought of mathematics,
Yes.
right? And that's how it is that's how it is in the metaphysical
Yeah, but
realm. That's
also-
not
yeah.
mathematics is not physical.
Sure,
it's
but
metaphysical.
my point is that you can't translate over what you see about the physical over onto the metaphysical. Or you can't overlay it just like that, because there's
No,
for
it's a
example-
metaphor.
Yeah, no, but
That
but it
itself
doesn't
is a metaphor.
Sure, but here's the thing: science. If you look at science itself, it's based on induction. It doesn't give you certainty anyway. So the models always keep changing. So today they're saying the following what you're saying. Tomorrow they'll come up with a different theory. That's the nature of science. It's fluid. It's not. It doesn't work with absolutes. So to use it as
That's a bit of a misrepresentation, because although if you talk about science as like one whole massive field, that's not really a good way of looking at it, because science has many different fields and they're not all the same.
But I'm talking about the foundations of science itself. If you look at the philosophy of science, it's based on certain principles such as induction, the method it uses, and if you speak to any philosopher of science, he will tell you that science doesn't deal with absolutes. It doesn't give you 100% truth or certainty, because it deals with
That's not science. That's the philosophy of science.
Yeah, but that's what science is based upon. Because science, for example, science.
Not really. In order to
yeah.
do science, you don't need philosophy of science to do science.
but
You
philosophy-
may be using it without realizing
No,
it,
we
but
don't-
you don't need to have those.
Let me just
philosophies
clarify
to do
my
science.
point.
And I
I'm-
think most of them didn't.
Sure.
They might have had a knack for it,
Yeah.
but they didn't.
No, but let me clarify. You're right.
they weren't philosophers,
Science
they were
doesn't need the
scientists.
philosophy of science, because philosophy of science isn't a thing. What philosophy of science is, it describes the method of science. So it just explains what's there.
Exactly.
Yeah?
Exactly.
So that's what I'm telling you. What it's describing is that science is based on things like induction, is based on empiricism, the empirical method. And if you just look at induction as an
But
example.
I want to go back to what you said. That's
Let me just
changing.
finish the one
Go
point.
on.
Just if you look at induction as just one example, induction is when you do your observations, you take many observations, and then you make a general conclusion based upon it, right?
Yeah,
So you say you observe 10,000 birds in Hyde Park over a month.
Yeah.
Now the scientist observes them and he sees every single bird is grey, and therefore at the end of his experimentation he concludes that all birds that fly over Hyde Park are grey. This is the use of induction in science. This is what they do. But what you see is that there's always room for error. There's a very interesting book by Samir Okasha called The Introduction to the Philosophy of Science. He touches upon this as well.
That's
but
biology. It's not the same as
No,
physics.
this is across the board. Physics, biology, chemistry. The method that's used is based on induction. It's always going to be the case, because you're always working with observations, and your observations are always going to be limited.
Okay, well, let's put it this way. When you say science changes, those laws of physics I was talking about, they haven't
Science
changed.
doesn't change, but
They
what
haven't
science?
changed.
No.
So
we're
there's
getting
no
mixed,
point
yeah.
in putting them all in one bag when they're actually very separate.
No. Let me just
understand?
let me differ. You're right, because when we talk about the laws of physics are what they are. They are things that
I'll
we.
tell you what. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to let you finish to your end point,
Yeah.
and then I'm gonna.
That's fine. That's fine.
Because we're getting very stuck on.
Yeah,
So
well, let's
go on.
move on past this
Go
point
on.
as well quickly. But my only point with science is this: that it doesn't deal with absolutes, because it's based on things like induction. So that means your observation is always limited. You never have an infinite number of observations, right?
Okay.
Therefore, you can't make truth claims that it's absolutely this way, absolutely that.
Okay.
That's well respected. It doesn't mean science doesn't work. Science works. It's phenomenal. It's a great method, right? We love it, but it doesn't
Love
deal with
your
absolutes.
science.
Absolutely, bro.
Yes,
we
we
love
do.
our science. We should love our science at least.
Go on.
So yeah, that was the point basically with science. I don't know if you want to say anything regarding those science itself before we move on to the next one.
I think I already said.
Okay. So just the last point I want to touch on was Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. If we feel we can move to that point now.
Sure.
Because as far as I understand it, you don't consider him to be a prophet of God, or what's
That's
your
right.
position? Okay.
Yeah. So the way I understand God, the way I understand rather our relationship with God, is that I believe that God it gives His message through everybody, through their heart, through their mind, through their experience, through their knowledge, etc. That's how God gives the message to people. Now I think when you believe in a person that's given a message, that can take you away from the message that you have. Now, the closer that the message is of that person to what God wants, right, the less it's going to take you away, and the more that person will encourage you to listen to that message inside your heart, right? I believe that when it comes to Islam, Prophet Muhammad, I do not believe that is very close to the message of what God has given in the heart. Now, for example, if I'm going to look at you, right, and you seem like... Sorry, you okay?
Yes. Yes. Fine.
Okay. You seem like a nice guy, and maybe Islam has even made you a nicer person. I don't know your history, right? it's like you've got the idea, you've got the Quran, which is a perfect book, right? But we're not perfect. So what's the point of having this perfect book if you're not perfect? It's like having a what's it called in Oxford? What's the highest level degree where you get when you but you get a really good mark. It's called class, first class.
First class.
A first.
Yeah.
You get a first in Oxford, and then you're flipping burgers. I mean, what's the point of having something
so you're misunderstanding what the
that's
Qur'an
perfect?
is. No, but here's the thing.
When anyway, we're not perfect.
But here's the thing. The Qur'an is guidance, right? It's guidance. Hudan lin-nas, for example, it's guidance for mankind.
Yeah.
Now, it's there for a particular purpose, which is to guide imperfect human beings and to get them on a track which is the best that they can be, right? Or to aspire to be best they can aspire to be. No one's going to be perfect.
Yeah.
So there's no logical correlation there. Just the guidance could be perfect. How much you follow, or how much you can follow, how much you try to follow is up to the individual, right? So I don't think there's a discrepancy there. But anyway, should we move to the point of prophethood? Quickly touch on that before we go over
I've
that.
actually gotta go.
You gotta go?
Yeah. Do you want to finish off?
Yeah, let's finish up quickly. 2 more minutes. 5 more minutes.
No, I've got to go now. I've
Okay.
got to go now. But do you want to continue?
Yeah, we can carry
Yeah,
on. I'll probably be here next week or the
No, I'll
following.
come back today. I've just got to go.
Okay, when you come back, we'll do prophet.
Okay, let's go. Okay, all right, okay, see you.